My name is Maurice Guibard. I'm a historian and also the executive director of the Société historique francophone de la Colombie-Britannique. Today we're going to learn about the folk traditions of French Canadians, including this sash, the Assomption Sash, which is the symbol of French Canadians. What are its origins? Why and when do we wear this sash? Also, we're going to be talking about the French Canadian jig and also the playing of the spoons. Where does that all come from? You're also going to learn how to play those spoons as well as to dance the seated jig. What I'll be wearing today is this sash, known to Anglophones as the Assomption Sash. In French it is called ceinture fléchée, ceinture for sash or belt, fléchée because of the arrow design here. This sash is the symbol of French Canadians. You might think, well, what about the fleur-de-lis? The fleur-de-lis, which does appear on the flag of Quebec, is really the link between the original families that emigrated from France to New France. It is their cultural and linguistic link to France. But the sash remains the traditional symbol of French Canadians. Where do these sashes originate from? They would have been hand braided by families in French Canada in villages, and many of them would originally have been made first for the farmers themselves. The man of the family in particular would have worn a sash at home on special occasions, rarely in the field. But as the Hudson's Bay Company was going further and further west and was constantly in need of voyageurs, these are the men who accompanied the fur trade further and further west, these men coming from all these villages would have worn a sash identical to this, but twice as wide and twice as long. Since they were expected to be paddling their canoe 12 hours a day, singing as they went, they would have wrapped this sash tightly around their loins to protect their back from that huge amount of exercise and effort that lasted all day. Contrary to the Scottish families, where each family has its own tartan, there's only 5 motifs of this sash in Canada. This one is the most common, and it is again the one from l'Assomption, the Assumption region of Trois-Rivières. This one was made for me in the 1970s by a woman who hand braided this, and she even put in her initials here because this is considered a work of art. She made this sash during the resurgence of French Canadian culture and art and crafts of that period. 70 hours to make it, and she charged me $150 only. Her regular fee was $300, but for a student, half that. Today it remains my treasure. If you want to have one of these hand-braided sashes today, you're looking at about $1,500. Most of the sashes are made by loom. This is the same design, though different colors, as this one. It represents the Assomption Sash. You can tell the difference because in the hand-braided one, the points of the arrows, and in particular the lightning bolts on either side, do not appear as clearly in the machine-loomed one as they do in the hand-braided one. This is the sash of the city of Quebec. You can see that instead of the lightning bolts on either side, there are diamonds on either side of the central row of arrows. The other designs are that of Acadia, so parts of New Brunswick and Nova Scotia, and it is rows of arrows in both directions that are in the colors of the Acadian flag, red, white, and blue. This rather colorful one is that of Dr. Chénier, who was a French-Canadian patriot, and colors that we don't necessarily see, again, rows in both directions of arrows. And this last one is that of the region of Charlevoix, and you can see the wider model for the men, the narrower for the women. And here you can see it's down to just chevrons, right? It's sort of arrows, but referred to as chevrons. And that brings to mind some of the very early influences of First Nations sashes and designs on the designs of the French Canadian sash. What I'm holding now is the Métis sash. It's the same design as the Assomption Sash. What the Métis did to this sash is they added the darker colors, so a dark blue and black, and those two darker hues are made to represent the difficult decades of Métis history in Canada. Métis also attribute meanings to each of the colors of their sash, which is different from French Canadians, where there is no designation of specific color-related meaning. Now, if these are done on both finger or loom, the original ones would have been made with a very, very fine cotton thread. This is a machine-made one, women's size. Mine is made with a fairly thin wool that you can see here. And there are some that are made with a much thicker wool. What might these be? Both French-Canadian men and women wore thick woolen socks up to the knee, which tended to fall down, to sag. So these are garters worn by both men and women, and they would have been tied around the top of the sock to prevent the sock or stocking from falling down. Very nice touch of color as well. And you can probably discern that this one is machine made and this one is hand braided. So I said earlier, this is the symbol of French Canadians, but we haven't been always known by that name. Within a few generations of settlers in New France, those who chose to stay began to call themselves Canadiens, right? This is the new land, and this is the name they had for themselves. At the time of the English conquest of New France, the settlers that were still here, well into many generations, still called themselves Canadiens. Those that conquered retained their original name of the English because they were proud of where they came from, but the last thing they wanted was to associate their name with the name of the people they had just conquered. There was no such thing as an English Canadian at that point. So what do we have today that is still Canadien? Just think of the Montreal hockey team, the Montreal Canadiens. Not Canadiens, it's E-N-S like in French. And why? Because Montreal had two professional hockey teams. One was French Canadian, the Montreal Canadiens, and the other was composed of Anglophones, and it was the Montreal Maroons, long since forgotten. Now, if you just go back to the Montreal Canadiens, that logo, that big C, what's in the middle? A big H. That, most of you will remember, the Habs, but that stands for habitant, which is the French Canadian term for a country dweller, i.e. a farmer. So that team was in effect meant to represent French Canadian farmers. If we talk about Canadiens, we have to talk about soirées canadiennes as well. These are French Canadian gatherings, mostly during the winter, where not only would we bring together our larger family, but also villages might invite the next villages all around to diversify the families, and where you might even meet your next wife or husband. We're getting ready to sing, to dance, and to do that we need music. So what musical instruments would we have used? Almost always there would have been a fiddler, male or female, but usually a man. If we're lucky, someone might be able to play the harmonica, and really lucky, an accordionist. Once we had the fiddler playing, we needed a bass sound for the music, and that would not have been provided by drums, but more so by the seated jig. And we'll get to that later on. There's another musical instrument we would have used, and that would have been the spoons. Now I'm holding a pair of soup spoons that are made of metal. We would not have used metal spoons back then because they would have been too expensive. Metal would have meant silver or pewter. So most of the spoons we would have had on the farm would have been carved wood, and that's what we would have used. Now, we have wooden spoons today too, but most of those are of this type, right? They're almost called cheater spoons, but these are valid musical instruments. You can buy them in pretty much any musical instrument store around the world, because these are part of the percussion section of every philharmonic orchestra in the world. And where do they originate from? From Quebec. It's just as if you're buying a musical instrument like a guitar, you would have wanted to try that guitar out before you buy the guitar. Same thing goes for spoons. You want to have a nice sound. So in this particular case, I'm going to play it for you. It's a very nice, rich, loud sound. This is a nice pair of spoons. Not too common. This one is a bit harder to find, but it also has a very nice sound. You'll notice it's a higher tone, but again, it's bright and it's loud. Nice pair of spoons. This one here is quite elegant. Very, very different sound. It's almost like a horse trotting. It's a lovely sound. Not as loud as the others, but it's still a nice sound. This is a fairly common pair of spoons, but it's face-to-face as opposed to back-to-back, speaking of the spoons, and it's shaped like the head of a duck. A completely different sound, somewhat tinny, almost metallic. It's up to what you like. This is not my favorite sound. This one, very solid. One of the nicest, brightest, loudest sounds that you can possibly get. As it turns out, the official spoons of the Quebec Carnival, fairly expensive, so it depends what you want to spend. But this is a great pair of spoons. Let's get back to our metal spoons. So again, any metal spoon will work. Usually you try to get two identical spoons. These are soup spoons. They happen to be oval. They can be oval or round. It doesn't matter. For children, maybe a pair of coffee spoons, teaspoons, will be easier to maneuver. The most important part is that the back of the handle must be absolutely flat. No ridges, no edges, so that it doesn't cut your fingers while you play. I'm a left-hander, so I play with my left hand, so act accordingly. Now, to start with, you take one spoon with the bowl open to you, and you hold it between your thumb and forefinger, the index, and you open the other fingers completely. Then you push the tip of the handle into the middle of your palm. You may have to move the spoon up a bit, that's okay. Then, without moving those three other fingers, you put the other one back to back. The index stays there. And then you close your fingers tightly. Notice they're completely closed, not like this where you can see they're completely over the spoons. Now the trick to playing the spoons, which is a rhythm of 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, is to hold them loosely enough that you have a sound, but tight enough that they don't go all over the place on you. All right? So you give this a try, find what works for you. What we want is a 1, 2, 3 rhythm, and the 1 is always on the thigh. You play on the thigh opposite the hand in which you hold the spoons and both feet on the ground. So it's 1, 2, 3. The hand is right here, not up here. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, thigh, hand, thigh, thigh, hand, thigh. All right? That's the basic movement. Then you can get into different things that will let you have fun with your spoons, different rhythms, different maneuvers. Here's one. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3. Okay? Now there's another one that's a bit more complicated, but I'm sure you can manage it. You hold the 4 fingers of the other hand tightly, and by loosening the spoons a little bit, you just run down the spoons along the fingers, and it's called a thunder of spoons. And at the very end, you make your loud sound and you tighten your spoons, because you will continue with 2, 3. So you have 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So there, you've already got a routine, and here it is. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3. And there you go. That's how we play the spoons. For French Canadians, jig is competitive. But if you're playing the spoons and you still want to jig, then you do the seated jig. We don't know today still what is the original source of the jig. We do know it was danced in Europe, but in the 16th century there was a great exchange, cultural and musical exchange between Ireland, Scotland, England and France. Those are the regions where we saw the jig mostly danced. So it's from around there. Each of those regions still retains their own types of jig, and we see different types in Canada, in the United States, from step dancing to jig. Jig was never a partner dance, it was always competitive. Men against men, women against women. So basically, a young man and a young woman, basically they would decide in their own farmhouses, one in the barn, one in the kitchen, let's say, all year long they would have been practicing their own steps to shine during that competition. So, and then once at the soirées canadiennes, the caller, that is the man who called the square dancing, the round dancing, he would yell out, Mesdames et Messieurs, la gigue. That meant the jigging competition was about to start. Everybody would form a large circle, the music would start, the fiddler, and then the first man, someone would dance to the center and he would do his own steps. He would be applauded and dance back, and the second man would make his way to the center and then back again. Then a woman would come to the center and back, and a second woman, and so on until everybody who wanted to participate had danced. Always applauded, and by the end of that competition, we would have known who would have won, right? Now, for those who are playing the spoons, and for those who are older, the seated jig is much less demanding, and that is what I'm going to teach you today. I'm dancing with tap shoes, but 300 years ago, we wouldn't have worn taps. They didn't exist. So on the farm, we would have just had solid work boots. There is such a thing as the Métis dance as well, which is similar, but is danced wearing moccasins. So it's a softer step. For those in French Canadian households where there would have been Métis or First Nations blood, very possibly there might have been some dancers wearing moccasins as well. The dance is always danced with that 1, 2, 3, remember, that we learned from the spoons. Both feet are on the ground. You always start with the right foot. You put your right heel down. You put your right toe down, and then the full left foot. So right heel, right toe, left foot, right heel, toe, foot, heel, toe, foot, heel, toe, foot, heel, toe, foot, heel, toe, foot. So that's about quarter of the speed with the true rhythm of French Canadian dance music. Heel, toe, foot, heel, toe, foot, heel, toe, foot. You can also add a little bit of a change to that in that it becomes 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, stamp, stamp. So the fun part is we can link the spoons to la gigue assise, the seated jig. We're going to slow down the pace on this one, and we're going to get back just to our basic 1, 2, 3 rhythm, all right? So with the spoons, we get to the 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Now just the jig. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Just the spoons. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Feet. 1, 2, 3. Just spoons. Just feet. Just spoons. Just feet. Now one of each. Spoons. Heel, toe, stamp. 1, 2, 3. Heel, toe, stamp. 1, 2, 3. Heel, toe, stamp. 1, 2, 3. Together. Heel, toe, stamp. 1, 2, 3. 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 1, 2, 3. It isn't easy from the beginning to do both of them together. You have to isolate. But that is the fun of doing the seated jig while you're playing the spoons as well. We've learned a lot today. We've learned about the French-Canadian sash and how it's a symbol of French Canadians. You've learned about the origins of the term canadien, also of the voyageur. You've also learned how to play the spoons, where this all comes from, and how to dance the seated jig. So as you practice those two new techniques, you will be able to display your own joie de vivre at the next soirée canadienne.